Welcome. Great to have you here. This is a unique moment, a moment that unites all of us. We all face anxiety and loss. We all see broken systems. We all experience the impact of the climate crisis. This is a unique moment. This is a turning point if we choose to make it one. This is a moment to reflect, to learn, to share, and to co-create. And I invite you to contribute. I ask you to contribute. I ask you to partner to fix broken systems. I ask you to join the movement so everyone can step into their change-making power. I ask you to nominate the next generation of changemakers. And I ask you to share your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise. And I ask you to donate to support changemakers. This is our moment to fix the world. This is our moment to contribute. Today is the day, and you are the one.
Welcome everyone to our session, Embracing Complexity Towards a Shared Understanding of Funding System Change. It might seem that Embracing Complexity stands somewhat in contrast to our theme, Rediscovering Certainty, because embracing complexity and working in systems means to a degree letting go of certainty. However, also in the context of working to change systems, we will uncover in this session some key learnings that, at least based on our current understanding, we feel pretty certain about. So hopefully at the end of the session, you will feel more certain as well about how funders can partner with social entrepreneurs most effectively to support their system change goals. So I will be your moderator today. My name is Florian Rutsch. I'm a co-leader of the Ashoka Europe Fellowship Program. I'm involved in our co-learning and co-creation work, which includes engaging with the social entrepreneurship ecosystem around funding system change. And I'm one of the co-authors of the Embracing Complexity report, the report with the same name of the session, and also an author of a previous report called 7 Steps for Funding System Change, which is one of the many sources the Embracing Complexity report is based on. With me is also Odin Mühlenbein, one of the key co-initiators of the reports and collaboration from Ashoka. And he will be available to you in the chat on Swapcard, and he will monitor the questions feature on Swapcard for you as well. So I have a few guidelines for engaging with this session for you. And that includes to please use the chat function to connect and to comment, to share your opportunities and resources that you have about funding system change. And there's also a separate question features, as you've probably discovered already on Swapcard, to share any questions for our amazing speakers today. You can also upvote questions there, and we will review them, monitor them, and bring them up at the appropriate times. And of course, most importantly, please download and read and share the report. The link is on the Swapcard page, and we'll post it again later in the chat as well. A brief introduction of our agenda today and our speakers. I will start with a brief framing of the report and then invite François Bonici, head of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs, to share his perspective as a partner in this report. Then Katharina Wagner from McKinsey will share a summary of the report. She's one of the main authors and facilitators of this collaborative process. Then we have Paul Bradley from ROC USA, an Ashoka Fellow, sharing from a practitioner, a social entrepreneur, perspective on what it takes to work towards system change and how that affects the funding he needs. And then we'll close with a donor perspective from Anna Markland, who leads the work at Unlimited on supporting system change. And at the end, we should have some time left for your questions. So don't forget to share and upvote your questions on Swapcard. So why did we embark on this work? It's clear that we need better social systems, and that was clear already before COVID, but it's made it ever clearer. Because if we really want to fix problems, then we need to look at the broken systems that are producing those problems. Now, social entrepreneurs and other change leaders can help us achieve that system change. They are change agents in this system change game. And they do this by practicing a particular kind of leadership, has many names. It's empathetic, servant, and persistent, because system change, in our understanding, is a very relational game. The challenge is that system change work is very different from perhaps standard project or program-based work. It requires different mindsets, different measures of success, adaptive long-term strategies, and a whole lot of other qualities that are quite different from everyday work. And when we look for funding for this kind of work, there is not much of it. So this is the challenge that we have embarked together as collaborators. The fact that there is just not enough funding suitable for this kind of systemic work. And as a result, all of us together are missing out on the potential for much greater impact. I want to illustrate that with just sort of two sets of data. And we find that one of the most important elements of funding for system change is long-term unrestricted funding. And when we asked the system change leaders that we interviewed for this report, how many of them have what percentage of funds available to them as unrestricted funding, then you can see here that almost 3/4 of the respondents only have less than 1/4 of their funds available to them unrestricted. And it's such essential funding support when you're working towards system change, because that work, again, is adaptive, flexible. It needs to allow for some risk taking. So unrestricted funds are a game changer. One more statistic that's important for us to highlight is that system change leaders and practitioners are at the forefront of this work. They are deeply embedded in the systems, and so it's important that we partner with them on the same level, and we support them in their understanding and vision for the system change that they're working towards. But what we see actually happening is that the great majority, you can see here, 40% had to make significant changes and 44% minor changes to their work to adopt to or adapt to funder requirements. So that's why we came together as a set of partners. Ashoka, Catalyst 2030, another network of leading social entrepreneurs collaborating towards system change around the world. Co-Impact, an amazing system change funder. Echo and Green, also a wonderful network of social entrepreneurs. The Schwab Foundation, represented by Francois. Today, again, an amazing global network of social entrepreneurs. SCOL and a funder, and similarly with the SCOL Foundation, they have a set of amazing SCOL awardees, social entrepreneurs working towards system change, and a funder too. The process was supported by McKinsey, represented by Katarina today, and Systemic. And together we wanted to show that there is a broad consensus among practitioners, funders, and intermediaries. You'll find plenty of information about system change out there, and plenty of different definitions and approaches, but we wanted to show that there is a common ground and pave the common ground for us to move forward in supporting system change. So we interviewed over 60 intermediaries, system change leaders, and so forth. We surveyed over 110 system change leaders and reviewed more than 70 other reports and sources. These principles that you'll hear about more in a moment are also applicable for anyone supporting social entrepreneurs. So it's a very valuable piece of work that we hope you'll enjoy reading. And with that, I will stop sharing and stop my sharing, because now I'm excited to invite Francois Bonici, head of the Schwab Foundation and the World Economic Forum, one of the partners, as I mentioned, in this collaborative effort, to share a bit more about why, from your perspective, you believe funding system change is an opportunity not to be missed, and how you and we together as collaborators can help achieve this goal of funding system change. Over to you, Francois.
Thank you so much, Florian. Delighted to be here at the Ashoka Changemaker Summit, participating, listening into some of the other sessions earlier today, and to be on this panel with great colleagues. So thanks for having me here. I think first off to note, the very act of coming together to actually have a common voice and a common understanding between some of the key organizations you spoke about that were partners on this report is already an important signal and symbol of how recognizing we all need to be working alongside and in support of and sharing knowledge at a time of continuing great uncertainty, moving towards the certainty, as you've said, with the summit. I think that there's something symbolic in that process that is also reflective of what's happening out there right now. Why is this an important time? And I'm just delighted that this work around trying to understand what is systems change work as a practice for social entrepreneurs and change leaders, as well as how do funders work as partners in that journey, given a lot of their aspirations are the same in the kind of greater ambitions they have, has been happening for the last couple of years. We know, that this report is based on so many other pieces of work that you yourself, Lauren, and Odin have been involved in. The Schwab Foundation, driven by our community, were asking us the questions. Okay, even as a quite a well-established community of what we call late-stage and inverted commas social entrepreneurs, already, let's say, reaching 1 million people, were still feeling like they were just scraping the top of the iceberg or recognizing the persistence of the problems. Asking those questions to us led us to start doing some work, which we called a report called Beyond Organizational Scale, and trying to understand what were the practices. So to do this work, to understand what are the practices of funders at a time where philanthropy has been questioning its own role around how does it work and what are best practices in philanthropy, unrestricted funding, different processes, grantee discussions, thinking about reporting. All of these things actually have equipped us in a way to be ready for this moment. I don't think we're fully equipped. I think we still, there are a lot of questions, but we're better equipped had we not done this work. So I just want to emphasize that and why it's an opportunity right now. It's clear COVID has exposed, so many systemic inequalities, and we can't ignore it anymore. We have to work in this way. There is no other option. The direct work that we all do is the basis, the grassroots work that people do, but recognizing the barriers they've had all along have been barriers of power differentials, of stigma and norms, of policies, all of these things that we're starting to unpack as quote unquote systems. We're learning the tactics from those who've done it well as the funders who've been able to fund that work well, alongside the more direct work that needs to continue. So it really is, the moment for us to do this. A lot of funders are on that journey already, using the data collected in this report and the insights, allows people to share and say, okay, well, this is how I did it. And it's really into the practicalities. And I think funders out there can really take this journey with other funders, but also with their partners and social entrepreneurs. And Katerina will talk us through, I'm sure, some of the data coming out of this, but that's the real reason. I think everyone's realized no one can do this alone, that this is a journey together. And certainly, to come to your second question, Florian, which is also what are we doing about it? How are we doing it? One of the ways is to be able to kind of, as an ecosystem that supports social entrepreneurs, number one, come together and figure out where we have synergy. And so we're doing that in ways like this today, but also, we've established the COVID Response Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs, 80 ecosystem organizations wanting to support and are supporting social entrepreneurs during the time of COVID. Again, sharing, learning, figuring out synergies and developing a common agenda and a common voice, but also pulling in new actors. And that's also what we clearly need to do. We need to grow the pie as well as to use the resources in different ways. And I think that's what today is about. The other kind of, I guess, piece that we need to recognize is how we evolving kind of this concept of social entrepreneurs and getting out of our bubble into the mainstream, right? And I think that is also the work of a work that funders can play a really important role in. And here is a safe space, I think, for us as a community to get together, but out there in the world, there's also places that we need to be supportive of each other. And learning how to do that over the long term is part of what this journey is about. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we actually want to hear from Paul and the practitioners as well. But I think there is a real, there has been a momentum to this moment, and this moment has presented the opportunity. And the question is up to us around what do we do right now. So that's it from me, and thanks again.
Thank you so much, Francois, for joining us. Also want to point out the great work you're doing with leading the Secretariat of the COVID-19 Alliance at the World Economic Forum for Social Entrepreneurs. And I'll see if I can share a link to that in the chat as well, which Ashoka is one of the 82 partners of. Thank you very much, Francois. All right, and then over to Katharina Wagner, as mentioned, one of the main authors and facilitators of the report. She will introduce to us the 5 key principles that have emerged as a result of the research and collaboration. So over to you, Katharina, and the slides will come in a moment too.
Thanks a ton, Florian. So while we're waiting for the slides, let me just say I'm super excited to be here. It's always great to see the group of partners that we've worked with again. And now we have slides. So let me just briefly talk about the overview of the 5 principles that we've presented in the report. So they are not really intended as definitive, this is how you have to do things, but rather as patterns that have emerged from our conversations with all the social entrepreneurs and funders and partners and sector experts that we've had during the report process. And for each of them, I'll be talking about a couple of the observations we've had and a couple of the patterns that have emerged for funders that do support systemic initiatives well. So when we look at the 5, the first one, embracing a systems mindset, to me is really how funders see themselves as actors in this space. We'll come to what that means in a second. Principles 2, 3, and 4 talk a little bit more about what the implications are for their work. So how do they collaborate with the social entrepreneurs they support? And what does that mean in terms of timelines, for example, and comfort with change? And then finally, principle 5 talks about how funders interact with other stakeholders, including other funders, but also the broader community of stakeholders that are involved in systems change efforts. So let's look at each of them in a bit more detail. On principle 1, embracing a systems mindset. So this is really where it all starts. And it means that funders who are interested in supporting systemic initiatives, first of all, develop an internal clarity on what systems they are interested in, because there's huge conversations to be had about what is a system and what counts, what doesn't count, where do you scope it. And just as an organization, developing clarity. I'm hoping my audio is getting better. Otherwise, I can also dial in, but I'll just cuddle with the laptop for a sec. Yep, okay. So as an organization, developing clarity on what the system is that the organization wants to work on is important. And also perceiving oneself, the organization, as part of that system, because where funding goes, things may shift, and that might influence the system the organization is trying to influence. So just being aware that this is a moving target maybe, and that things shift is important. And then also thinking about what that means in terms of organizational dynamics. What might need to change within the organization to make systemic efforts work in terms of what kind of relationships do the staff have with social entrepreneurs? What kind of accountabilities are there? How does the organization think about performance and risk-taking? So all these different elements play a role in embracing that systems change mindset. And finally, the sort of third pattern on the mindset change would be switching from we have people who come to us looking for funding to we actively go out and look for opportunities that we want to support, because there's a good chance that the opportunities that are best suited to support a certain type of systems change may not even be aware of that specific funder looking to fund that change. So making sure, like increasing the likelihood that these two parts meet by actively looking for opportunities is another important way of embracing that mindset. Then looking at the second principle. So here we've already heard a little bit about things evolve. And in fact, 3/4 of the respondents in our survey said that they've experienced major changes in their systems change efforts along the way. And that means that funders have to be comfortable with that level of change. That might also influence how they think about selecting funding opportunities and supporting them. So a couple of different ways of what that could look like is, first of all, looking at the social entrepreneurs, the leaders, the teams behind an idea, rather than the suitability of a specific project. Because usually the vision is a lot greater than a specific project that it starts with, and understanding the vision, if that is workable and if that really embraces systemic thinking, working from that and evolving together may just be a great opportunity. To do that, it's important to invest in learning and capability building, because a lot of times the teams, when they start, or the individual social entrepreneur, when they start, may have a skill set that equips them for the first part of the journey, but then once things start getting bigger and things start changing, other skills may need to be brought in, and there might be a need to reflect on what's happened and what that means for the path going forward. So making space for that reflection and learning, and I guess letting go of the perfection of we knew it all before, and instead embracing we've learned along the way, is really important to make the most out of that investment in systemic initiatives. And finally, with that change comes also an encouragement to embrace and encourage collaboration among different social entrepreneurs, systems change leaders. Because in traditional funding, there is a tendency to just focus on the hero that has done it all and can do it all. And instead, that tends to recreate a lot of things that other people have already approached and possibly solved. So focusing on collaboration and building on how does what you do fit into what others are doing, rather than why are you special, is also an important mindset change in that pattern of supporting evolution in systemic initiatives. Then looking at the third principle, Florian has already mentioned that the vast majority of systems change leaders report having had major changes to their initiatives to fit funders' requirements. And in fact, 40% out of the 90% that report having made changes, that they were major, up to we had to change pretty much everything. And what's at play here is power dynamics between one party that has resources and the other party needing these resources to implement a systemic initiative. So the first step here is acknowledging that there are power dynamics and taking these out of the picture in conversations between funders and social entrepreneurs, systems change leaders. Because that oftentimes inhibits open conversations about what's going well, what isn't going well, why might a funder's request not make sense if really systemic change is being targeted. And on the second level, being mindful of that power dynamic also means listening to the systems change leaders in terms of what is it they actually need, rather than pushing things onto them. It's about listening and drawing out what is most helpful to them. Because we all know that everyone's time is incredibly scarce, and using systems change leaders' time on things that aren't really most value adding simply because a funder has offered and one doesn't want to offend the funder or make sure that this isn't perceived negatively, just seems like not the best use of time. So being clear about, is this really helpful to the systems change leaders funders are supporting, is super helpful. And with that also comes a certain mindfulness of the limited resources that I've already mentioned. So a lot of times things like applications for new funding, but also reporting on funding received take an incredible amount of time, and the report lays out a couple of ideas how that can be reduced. For example, by having a conversation with the social entrepreneurs on what kind of reporting also helps you generate insight on how you're progressing, or even merging reporting for multiple funders and just sending one report instead of 5 or 10 to the individual funders that are involved with that one social entrepreneur. So moving on to the last one, that's sort of within the hands of the individual funding organization, preparing for long-term engagement. So here, the social entrepreneurs that we've asked in our survey said that, let's see, more than half of them said that systemic change takes at least 5 years, if not more. I think 12% said it takes at least 10 years. So there is a need for a long-term commitment, and it will take some time to see results. What does that mean for funders? It first of all means being realistic about how fast one can achieve things, and wanting the first report on what has changed after 6 months or a year may not be realistic. Second of all, it also means that over the course of half a decade or a decade, a lot of things will change, and a lot of them will not be in the hands of the systems change leaders implementing initiatives. That might mean that initiatives need to adapt. That might mean that we learn a lot more about how a system works, or we've adapted or changed certain elements of the system, and that's led to changes in other parts of the system. So acknowledging that there are things that will change, coming back to 3/4 of systems change leaders report major changes along the way. Acknowledging that is really, really key. And then finally, on the on long-term engagement, encouraging realistic ambitions. That's a fine balance between, as I said, not wanting the results after the first 6 months, but also pushing as a funder to think bigger where that's possible. So this can go either way. It's a fine balance, as I said, but being realistic yet ambitious is also helpful to make that happen in the long term. And then finally, let's look at the 5th principle. So here we're talking about how individual funders interact with other stakeholders, in particular other funders. And that's also the first point here, align with other funders. There's a lot of times, again, that perception of everyone does it on their own, and that leads to a lot of struggle for the social entrepreneurs, the systems change leaders that are being supported, because they have to interact with 5, 10, maybe even more different parties that all have their own ideas of reporting and impact measurement and discussions that should happen. So the more that can be aligned between different funding parties, the better in terms of time, because we're having one conversation instead of 10, the better for strategic alignment, and the better for impact. Second, most funders already have amazing long-standing networks, and opening these networks to the systems change leaders they are supporting is incredibly helpful, because their brand and name recognition just opens a lot more doors than that of a social entrepreneur that's maybe just starting out. So leveraging these networks for the benefit of the initiatives that are being supported is important. And then finally, there also being willing to step back and leave the spotlight to the systems change leaders can be incredibly helpful, because they usually know best how they want to use their time in the spotlight and what they need to get out of certain relationships. So being willing to let go a bit there and give them the spotlight is also very helpful. So these are sort of our observations, the patterns we've seen in all our conversations. The report has a ton more like nice little tidbits of examples and what's worked for others. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to have a look there and see whether that resonates for you. And if you have feedback, please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Katarina, for sharing these aspirational principles that have emerged from the report. Indeed, please read the report. More case studies and examples are in there. Certainly more details to be figured out, but it's exciting that we have these 5 principles to work around together. Now, next, we're hearing an example from a social entrepreneur, what it takes to work towards system change. What does that look like practically? That kind of work, aiming for system change, and how does that affect your relationship with your funders, and perhaps some recommendations for funders as well. Paul Bradley, welcome on the stage, on the virtual stage from ROC USA, a great acronym, but actually it stands for Resident-Owned Communities. You've been, as you say, for 30 years scaling co-op ownership in low-income mobile home communities in the US. You were featured by John Oliver last year in one of his brilliant videos. And so we're excited to hear from you. What does it take to work towards system change, and how can funders support this kind of work? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Florian. I truly appreciate that. And let me go ahead and share my screen. So my PowerPoint's up for everyone. Happy to be here. I really appreciate Katarina's and Francois and Florian's framing of the issues. I think I'm so impressed with the macro level thinking and analysis that's been done here. As I look at systems change, I consider macro level systems change that is made up of a whole multitude of micro systems changes. And our work in a specific sector reflects a micro systems change. And it's really work that was informed in the mid-90s by some work done by the Aspen Institute, Peggy Clark and Steve Dawson, who published a book on sectoral employment strategies. They were specifically looking at private initiatives to influence a specific occupation, in that case, home health aides, which are low paid and generally held by minorities, and very difficult work that's underpaid and under-resourced, underappreciated. So it really resonated with me because our work was in a housing sector, but had a lot of similarities. And so I've identified the 4 elements of a sectoral strategy, which might be considered a microsystems change strategy. You know, in a sectoral strategy, you target a specific sector. That could be an occupation or a market. In our case, again, it's a housing market. You intervene in that market to become a valued player or actor within the industry. And that, I think, is really central to driving larger scale change from my own experience. In our work, you know, we're very focused on low income communities and communities of color. The economic systems, as a general rule, work against their interest on so many fronts. And so we're very focused in on this low income group of homeowners. And our aim, of course, is systems change over time. Just a quick step back for folks, or step in for folks into the manufactured housing sector. In the United States, this is a factory-built housing stock. It's built under a national building code called the HUD code. There have been 8 million of these homes built over the last 70 years, really. And about 5 million of them are on land that people own, and 2.7 million or so are actually on rented land in about 45,000 mobile home parks or manufactured home communities, MH communities. So again, the dynamic, people own their homes but rent the land. And really what's occurred here is, and the images sort of suggest this, right? In the 50s, these were travel trailers, and into the 70s, in this middle picture, they became more permanent homes. And today, these are high density, detached, single family neighborhoods of modest size homes. There's a lot to like about manufactured home communities from a smart growth standpoint. And they can be made very efficiently. We have some net zero homes going into co-ops. There's definitely energy efficient units being built today. And so very excited about this housing stock. And they're built at about a third of the cost of site-built housing. So very affordable. The problem is that, you know, what started off as a travel trailer where people were renting the land for the weekend, morphed into permanent housing, but people still rented the land under their homes. And that's really the problem that we're out fixing as a starting point. This work really became front and center on the national agenda here in the United States when the Ford Foundation began making investments in the manufactured housing sector in 2001. George McCarthy, as a program officer, came out of the University of North Carolina and was very interested in this housing stock as it serves a lot of low-income people, as you see. I'd say this from a program officer point of view and from a practitioner's point of view, George McCarthy leaned into this sector. He sat down at a lot of kitchen tables, at a lot of community centers and church basements. He learned about this industry from the inside out. He sat down with low-income homeowners and heard from them how this market works for them. And he engaged practitioners and policy advocates and actually funded a two-pronged strategy, a market-based strategy, of which Rock USA is one, and public policy and movement building strategies through an organization in Washington, D.C., as well as others around the country. And really, it is a strategy informed by the sectoral strategy that really aims at increasing actual ownership of the land. That's our work, but also using that public policy leverage and the industry player leverage to create larger scale systems change. And really the point there is long-term secure leases across this entire sector. Quite a difference if you're renting the land month to month versus having a long-term lease that gives you long-term security. And we're making progress. My role and responsibility, of course, is to help homeowners secure the land under their homes. We now support 264 of these co-op communities, about 18,000 homeowners in our communities in 18 states. And that's growing at an increasing rate. In 2019, we set a record of 25 new co-ops and almost 2,500 preserved home sites. But the work is broader than that. And I personally have sat down as a member of the National Trade Association with the largest REIT CEOs and COOs, and began working on exactly delivering long-term leases across the board. And there's a path to that, but it's going to require ongoing work and investment in the sector. The other piece, and another way in which this micro strategy contributes to macro level change, Next Step is a sister social venture to Rock USA within the market-based strategy piece of our strategy. And Next Step is very focused on energy efficient housing, basically working with industry that includes the intermediaries, what we call the retailers, as well as consumers, to get better, more efficient Energy Star rated homes out to the consumer market. It's a slightly more expensive product, so it takes education, but Next Step has basically intervened in the marketplace, in the production distribution chain, at that point of distribution, to influence the market and bring about greater usage of more energy efficient homes. That contributes positively to climate change and overall efficiency and cost effectiveness for home buyers. So it's a multi-pronged strategy with multiple players, both Next Step and Rock USA and the Innovations in Manufactured Homes policy group, are all highly networked and collaborative across the country, involving hundreds of organizations. This happens to be our network, just to give people a thumbnail sketch of our coverage in the country. Each of those yellow dots represents a resident-owned community, and these logos represent our network of affiliates. We have 10 today, and we'll have 12 in the next 2 months. And just last, a little bit from homeowners in our communities, just to bring this all the way down, to really get out of the bubble here, Francois, is to put some faces with some names and talk about what land ownership means to people in communities of color, as well as in majority white communities here in Washington and in Oregon. And with that, Florian, I'll go ahead and pass the baton back to you. Thank
you so much, Paul, for this insight into your system change work. I loved the note that you finished on. I think it resonates very well also with our everyone a change maker message that, if you put those in charge that are affected, you achieve better results. And it was great to hear your different strategies. As we've seen, you both have a market-based strategy, and then you're also building policy work, you're building a movement. So all of that together forms the system change strategy, rather than just alone your market-based strategy. Alone scaling that would probably not lead to the system change you're aiming for, but all of it together, your multi-pronged strategy, builds a complete picture. So thank you, Paul, for that insight. And now I'm delighted to welcome our last speaker today, and that's Anna Markland from Unlimited, a huge funder in the UK and now also with affiliates around the world, a real sort of cornerstone in the UK social entrepreneurship ecosystem, having supported, I don't actually know the exact number, it must be thousands of social entrepreneurs over the last 20 years. Back then co-created by a set of organizations where Ashoka was part of. So we're excited to hear from Anna how you have evolved your work to focus on the system change, since you were leading the system change work of Unlimited. So looking forward to hear from you. Why have you decided to focus on this work? How has that affected your principles and practices of support, and any other opportunities and challenges that you see for funders? Over to you, Anna.
Sure thing. Thanks, Florian, and thanks to everyone else. I'm mindful that going last means that I have to talk fast, just in order to leave time for your questions. So hopefully you guys can all see my screen, and I will keep this rattling through, but please do then put any questions in the chat that you have for me if I skip over something that you wanted me to say a little bit more about. So tackling those questions that Florian outlined in turn. So the first one was around, why did Unlimited move towards more of a system approach? And I should start by saying that this is definitely an evolving way of thinking for our organization. And it probably started in around 2016, when we moved towards a focus on 3 impact areas. So Unlimited, I should say, funds social entrepreneurs. And it's interesting for us is our system change around increasing access to social entrepreneurship and inspiring entrepreneurship within everyone. And how much is it actually the kind of end benefits that our social entrepreneurs are working towards? So this is something that we've been having to balance, and we used to do just completely open call with no particular social issue preferenced over any other, but we moved towards a model where we had a focus on access to employment for those furthest from the labour market, solutions for an ageing society, and then work around resilient communities. And that was probably one of our steps towards thinking about what is the impact that Unlimited wants to have, and what is helpful for us and our social entrepreneurs to drive real change in the UK. And that focus allowed us to have our staff developing expertise, which meant that we could provide better support for social entrepreneurs. And it also allowed us to focus more on strategic partnerships, because we kind of became more and more aware that we weren't going to make the change ourselves, and our social entrepreneurs weren't going to make the change ourselves, even if we managed to help them scale up. So how did we start working with other players in the system? And just to give an example, on our access to employment work, we had a real focus on closing the disability employment gap. And so we partnered with Scope, who are a big disability charity here in the UK. So that kind of system focus, the reason we moved towards it is because we realized it allowed us to be more thoughtful with our work, with our resources, with who we partnered and got funding from. So that was kind of something from our side. And then, of course, the other driver was the fact that we were hearing from our social entrepreneurs that there was an element missing in the support that we provided. So I lead on Unlimited's Pioneers initiative, and that started in about 2017, 2018. And the initial idea was for that to be around social entrepreneurship going mainstream, and being a proof that this model can work at scale and can actually drive meaningful social change. We then did some really deep work with social entrepreneurs, with our initial pioneers, who are with a lovely photo there of them in the corner. And what we were hearing from them is that actually they wanted to drive change, not necessarily at scale, but through system change, and that they needed different support from us in order to do that. So we, have traditionally provided a lot of advice around how to grow your business, around how to do a marketing strategy, how to recruit your team, all the kind of core things that a startup and a scale-up will need. But we were maybe giving less support around how do you influence local government, how do you attract investment for the really long term, how do you help tell the story of the complexity of the change that you're trying to create. So we basically realized that we weren't doing a good enough job to support our entrepreneurs, and that's another reason why we moved towards a system approach. And again, I should say that our thinking on this is growing, and I saw a question come in around how can social entrepreneurs of colour get noticed, and one of the things that Unlimited is trying to do and to kind of embed in our work is how do we think about how our funding can drive system change in different elements. So we are including targets for inclusion as part of our funding strategy. So that is maybe another way that we're trying to do a more system change approach. So that's kind of what the rationale is. What have we learned so far, and how has that influenced our funding? So these are just some emerging learnings for us, and there will be completely different learnings for the social entrepreneurs we're working with. But as a funder, we've realized that system change ambitions don't necessarily come once you reach a certain scale. So I think we initially thought that this would be a follow-on to some of our earlier funding. So you might, start with an idea, you might scale it up a bit, and then you go into driving system change. And we're realizing that that's not necessarily the journey that people have. And some are coming to us right from the very beginning that they want to do this, and then some people, having been in operation for 10, 20 years, are coming and saying, actually, I'm not seeing the impact that I want to, so I need to change my approach, can you help me? So that meant that we we changed our criteria for who was able to access our support and our funding for system change work. The next thing that we learned was around how difficult it is for social business leaders to take the time away from their core business to do this work. So they felt that this wasn't the day job. They felt that they were having to kind of explain to their team, to their board, and to their partners why they were almost doing what could have been seen as a side project or a hobby or a passion that they shared, but that wasn't actually delivering sustainability and financial returns to the business, and wasn't necessarily clearly linked to the impact that they wanted to have, because it felt quite nebulous and long term. So that was a really interesting learning for us around how do we help our social entrepreneurs take the time to do this. And the kind of big answer has been, initially at least, that we would have to give grant funding in order for people to be able to engage in this work. And so we've structured a program where you get intensive support, and often we would think, oh, well, you know, it's so good that you would just take it because you don't have to pay us. So surely that's kind of a valuable enough offer. But actually, no, we realize it does need to come with a grant, because otherwise people just don't make use of that support. And the final thing that we learned was around, even if we help our social entrepreneurs think in a more system change way, what they then struggle with is how do they pass that learning onto their team, onto their other funders, onto their partners. And that's not work that we normally do. We kind of tend to leave them to get on with it, but we've been thinking about actually what is our role as a funder to help educate others and help our social entrepreneurs move everyone with them towards this new way of working. So that's just some reflections there. And I guess in terms of what might that mean for our funding is, you know, we're thinking about how might we offer them top-up funding to convene or to train others, and what is our role in doing that. And my last kind of area was around the challenges and opportunities that are you know, maybe we're spotting as we've been doing this work. The first one, that if I talked about nothing else, it would be this one, of real genuine change in power dynamics. And for us to come to the table as another person who's learning about system change, I wouldn't say that we as a foundation have all the answers, neither to how to do system change nor to the change that actually needs to happen. So to illustrate a couple of ways that we've really committed to working in partnership with rather than in service of social entrepreneurs, we've done some co-award making. So we have a Social Entrepreneur and Community Awards that's distributed £200,000 in partnership with two of our pioneers. So they went out and they chose the cohort that they thought were going to make the biggest change. They are actually providing peer support to those social entrepreneurs, and Unlimited has provided the award and the overall structure. So that's quite a big shift, that we've kind of put that trust in our pioneers to know who on the ground they see are the real radical change makers, rather than us necessarily feeling the need to hold that power. And another example is maybe partnering with our social entrepreneurs in response to big government campaigns. So we hosted a roundtable with a whole bunch of social entrepreneurs around closing the disability employment gap. And instead of us presenting you know, our learning or some sort of report to government, we actually had government and our social entrepreneurs in the room, and they were talking directly, but we had convened. So that's kind of another way that we're working in partnership. And just then a few more things for funders to consider. One has been really, what is our expectation of our system changes, to kind of focus on one area, impact measurement. We might ask in our reporting for you to talk about the number of people that your work has impacted this year. And we know that's quite basic, and we also know that's almost entirely meaningless for system change. So how do we grow our own learning and our own expectations in order to fit better with system change practice? Because I don't think we have the answers yet. We need to think more creatively about funding options, and whether that's really patient long-term capital, as some of the work that Ashoka and others have said and called for, or whether that's realizing that even if you're a very well-established organization, you might need some grant funding in order to do this. And often we think that at that later stage, you don't need grant funding because you should be able to be sustainable on your own. And we know that now that's actually maybe not true. And then the last one is, what's our role in bringing others in on this change? And by this change, I mean the growing movement towards system change as an approach and as a methodology in the social enterprise sector. So that's it from me. Thanks very much, everyone. And I'll pass back over to Florian.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think there were plenty of really rich insights in there. You probably touched on most, if not all, of the principles in the report to some degree. Thank you for sharing that. Very humbling to see how you've gone on this learning journey and co-created it with social entrepreneurs, how you've partnered with them to design it, how you've listened to their needs, and I could keep going. So thank you for the work that you do. All right, we are nearing the end of our session. We have been monitoring the chat. Thank you everyone for contributing and sharing there. We've picked out some questions that we'll just try to squeeze in for a moment before we close. And I'd love to invite Francois back on the virtual stage to answer the question around, are you seeing openness among funders for this message, and which other nudges are needed to move the needle? Francois, if you can give a brief input, that'd be great.
Thanks. Just to say that certainly these discussions are happening in private funder circles amongst each other. So I mean, this is over the last several years, I've been invited to either participate in or help facilitate these funder conversations. So they're exploring, and funders are exploring internally around how to do this, sharing the kinds of things that Anna has spoken about, these different experiments, learning journeys, which have been fantastic, but also learning from practitioners like Paul through these relationships about how to do this. So it's happening. What further nudges are needed? Some example, Open Road Alliance, people have been following, how they've been doing unrestricted funding, and in this moment of COVID and in the COVID Alliance, they've really had an opportunity to share what they've done. So the nudges have been coming externally in a way, and in different sectors. So for example, education funders are getting together, thinking about this is also a moment to really help push some of the big shifts in education that people have been arguing for quite some time. Asking for what are the nudges? Asking for a seat at the table, asking your funders, are they thinking about this? In what ways are they thinking about this? How can you help them without necessarily, being, the caution around that power dynamic is real, but also the time is now to open up the conversation. So I think that's the place, and that's the role social entrepreneurs can have in accompanying funders on this journey, and recognizing we all need to learn together, and it's only by doing it together that we can do that. So trust the conversation is happening. They're probably hearing about it. It's not like all funders are going to be doing this kind of funding, but it's certainly increasing, and we have a role in this community to play to join with funders to do that. So just amazing to hear also from Anna and Paul around their work, and it's a journey I think everyone is on, so acknowledging that.
Thank you, Francois. And then I'll just open up one more time to Paul for one last comment as well before we close.
To our colleague who's looking for funding, a piece of sage advice I got years ago: ask for advice, get money; ask for money, get advice. So be active in the conversation, engage, as Francois was saying, engage your program officers and folks in conversation, ask for assistance with something you're struggling with, and build relationships. Thank you very much.
Thank you. These were both some really helpful closing words, and we're almost at the end, so I will leave it there. But thank you again so much to all of our speakers, Francois, Katharina, Paul, and Anna. I'm sure all of them are happy and available for any questions later on as well. If you have any, please reach out to us as well. We'll be available on the Swapcard platform. And there are more sessions on the topic of funding system change throughout the next days. So do join those too, do join in the conversations. And with that, please enjoy the rest of the day, however long your day might still be, and go and change systems. Thank you so much, everyone, and goodbye.